Know When to Fold 'Em by D.J.Fahl. The cool afternoon air whipped over Star Coyote's large ears. The wind was scented with a hint of pollen now that it was spring. He soared through the sky in his blue and yellow costume, which hugged his trim body. The sun was going to set soon. Star Coyote glanced at his wrist and remembered that he had taken his watch off to put his costume on. After I broke his last watch in a fight, he decided to save his money and just stash it with his clothes. He was still new at being a superhero. He looked at the ground below and saw people pointing up at him, some were even waving. They probably assumed he was out on patrol. Instead, he was headed to a time-sensitive mission. He couldn't arrive too early, as that would risk the DA's ability to get at the information. Too late and the data might be gone. Or worse, he would be late for his date. He blushed a bit as the wind ruffled his fur. It was hard to believe he had started dating someone. It had been completely unplanned. Originally, when he decided to put on the costume, he figured he had to forget about long-term relationships. It would be too much work to mesh with a crime fighter's lifestyle. Yet, thanks to a spilled slushie, he'd end up juggling a blossoming romance and a costume identity. Star smiled. Jay was certainly worth the work. He couldn't help but think about the collie's firm body and soft, thick fur. He had to make sure he was on time for this date. He didn't want to ruin his chances. He had to admit that flying over his city was fun. He had only put on the mask and costume a few months ago. Going from Ted Rodriguez to a superhero was a transition he had considered for a long time. It was a decision he didn't make until well after he achieved his powers and learned how to control them. Well, perhaps control was too strong a word. He still slipped up sometimes, floating when really excited and accidentally smashing coffee mugs. But he was getting better with his tricky powers now. The name Star Coyote was given to him by the Portland Gazette. Honestly, he would have chosen something else, like Sidewheel or Gravity Guy, but he hadn't gotten to the papers in time, and the name had stuck. He didn't mind it too much, and the people seemed to like it if the booming sales of street corner knockoff t-shirts were any indication. Flight was easily the most enjoyable power he had. He loved making himself light, soaring over the street, propelling himself above the populace with forces he didn't even understand himself. Star Coyote swooped down and waved at the people below as he flew over the city. He had to be careful about flying too fast. He might break windows, and he didn't think it would look good for a superhero to rain shards of glass onto watching denizens. This was simply a relaxed patrol over the city. Portland in general was pretty happy to have a hero. There had been local calls to try getting one for years. Having a hero ensured a lot of supercriminals steered away from the city. Ideally, if any came, they could be countered without risking police or civilian lives. Oregon and Washington had been trying to attract a superhero for a while with more lax laws involving super being activity and other benefits. The irony was that Ted had lived in Oregon most of his life and already had a job in the city of Portland. The welcoming atmosphere hadn't swayed him, it just made his life easier than working in Atlanta or Salt Lake City. Star still couldn't believe he had been given a PR agent by the mayor's office. That was a very nice perk. There was also the fact that the police department was extremely helpful coordinating with him, especially Officer Belinda Ramirez. Officer Ramirez recently had asked him for some help. Belinda had become the go-to girl for interacting with the police department, and she was easily his best ally on the force so far. He was only too happy to return the favour for the help he received. The Coyote's thoughts were interrupted when he heard a scream. Some guy was probably grabbing a pedestrian's wallet. A woman had seen it and was calling for help. Star Coyote floated downwards as the guy pulled a gun. Oh joy, Star grimaced to himself. This would make things tricky for his schedule. He wasn't bulletproof, not that he wanted anyone to know that. The gun wielder was a lap in brown fur, big ears, and very twitchy. Star Coyote landed behind him. The attempted mugging victim suddenly went from panic to flabbergasted, which caused the rabbit to whirl around. Star was ready for him and grabbed the gun in his paw, smirking as he said, "Sorry sir, need to see a permit for this." Before he could respond, Star had already focused, making his relative gravity heavier than the rabbit's, and he easily tore the gun from his paw. Keeping the gun away from the rabbit, he motioned at the mugger, saying, "Now, why not be smart? Drop the wallet, wait here for the cops, The rabbit turned and bolted. With an exaggerated sigh, Star Coyote lifted off into the air. He lessened the gravity around himself and tucked the gun safely in his utility belt as he gave chase after the mugger. Star Coyote had figured out long ago that his power revolved around altering his personal gravity field and the fields of those he touched. No one really knew the mechanism behind his amazing feats. It was safer for him that everyone just assumed he was super strong and able to fly. The rabbit didn't make it far. Star Coyote simply flew into the air and then swooped down, barreling into him. Pushing the rabbit to the ground, Star Coyote quickly clasped the brown furry paws and police cuffs. He did enjoy getting those from the cops. They were quite helpful. He was also getting better at using them after some practice. The bunny swore and struggled under the confidently grinning Coyote. Oh, don't feel bad. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and committing a crime. Why not avoid that next time by not mugging someone? Getting up, Star Coyote grinned as a police car approached. Dropping the gun out of reach of the rabbit, he jauntily saluted the cops as they got out of the car. With the police on the scene, he immediately flew into the air. He would normally stay and make a report, but he was going to be late if he delayed it much longer. He was trying very hard to be on time. His cell phone rang, and the Coyote smiled as he fiddled it out of his belt pocket. He didn't like to talk on the phone while flying, but he still answered. Hello? Ted? Star Coyote's heart fluttered, and a man's voice on the other end of the phone. Are you on the freeway? I'm hearing a lot of wind. Hello, Joe, the Coyote said happily. He grinned despite himself just hearing the collie talking to him. He wagged his tail, slowing down a bit. Just running some errands for tonight. So the boss let you go early? Asked Jay. Ted detected a hint of excitement in his voice. Yeah? Ted licked his nose and lied. He just liked keeping the truth from Jay, but it had to be done. I've still got to get those errands finished off. Alright, he heard the collie say over the phone. But try not to be late. We're having a big night tonight. Star Coyote laughed. You know me too well. I hope so, said the voice on the other end, and Star could just imagine the collie putting a paw on his hip and smiling. I just want to prove the gang wrong about you being a flake. Hey, have they been saying that? Star Coyote asked in a surprise. He could see the surly older Brandon making such a comment, but Maddie and Gary seemed just like nice friends of Jay's. They were hardly the type to call him a flake. They've just noted that you tend to be late, Jay reassured him. It's starting becoming a running gag with them. I'll try very hard to get there, said Star Coyote truthfully. I've just got a huge errand to deal with. Jay paused for a long moment and said, I don't really care. We always manage to have fun, no matter how late you are. A little patronising there, Jay, said Ted, even though his tail wagged faster. That pause was worrying. He knew Jay didn't like him being late. He arrived late to 3 of their past 5 dates. Just saying I enjoy your company, Mr. Rodriguez. So hurry on over here so we can have a fun night, Jay said easily, and Ted grinned. Of course, he said simply, and seeing his destination he had, have to go now. I'll be there soon. Bye, Jay said as the flying coyote turned off his phone. Now he really had to make sure he got there on time. He moved a little quicker towards the tower, the business office of Philip Larson. Councilman Larson was a very well-liked ferret in Portland. He was an elected official, known for some popular legislation, as well as a successful businessman. Everyone knew he had his eyes on the mayor's office, if not the governor's mansion. He was also, according to the cops and Vice, the dirtiest man in the city. He was behind a string of prostitution rings, illegal gambling on the riverfront, money laundering, and a host of other illegal activities. He was also impossible to get thanks to an impressive network of informants, dirty cops, and a top-notch legal defense team on the retainer. The cops and the assistant district attorney Swain were having an impossible time shutting his operation down. That was where Star Coyote came into the picture. There was a quirk in the legal structure, thanks to all those lax superhero laws that Ada Swan wanted to try. Star Coyote could arrest Larson if he deemed it necessary for the common good. It was a quirky bit of language that gave enough probable cause for the DA's office to cut through Larson's defences, and Dodgers to spearhead an investigation that could finally bring him down. It was a loophole that was too powerful and would need to be closed eventually, but for now it was the only avenue of attack. Star Coyote was angry at the councilman. Star Coyote was angry at the council. He had voted for the guy after all. It felt more than a little galling to find out about his ties to a host of illegal ventures. He'd found out most of the information from the councilman himself. Belinda Ramirez couldn't show him the records, just point him to the starting line. He had gotten the rest of the way, staking out the councilman for the last month, watching his movements and eavesdropping where he could. Today he would finally arrest the creep. This would be enough to get a warrant from a judge. Although Starr couldn't testify in court on the evidence he had personally collected, it was inadmissible. He could spur the investigation. It would become very public and be much harder for the ferret's cronies to deflect. He was sure he was right. He had to be. If he wasn't, he was about to ruin the reputation of the councilman and his own as a superhero. He grimaced at the entire situation, the annoying reminder that he was on a strict schedule. It set his teeth on edge. Tonight was a big opportunity. Larson's partners were running a huge gambling event, which meant he would, hopefully, not have all his records as hidden away. Time was short to arrest the guy, jumpstart the investigation, and get it all wrapped up before Larson could obscure everything. He landed on the roof of Larson's business headquarters. The man was well off, but he didn't own the building. He only rented a few of the top floors. He also hadn't thought to put more security on the roof door. Star Coyote concentrated a moment at the door, making his paw very, very heavy, and pulled down on the handle, ripping the lock off and swinging the door open. He floated down the stairwell, something he always wanted to do at work. He suppressed a giggle and tried to look stern. Arresting a councilman was serious business, but the action did make him think of awful vampire movies. He got onto Larson's floor and confidently strode down the hallway. It was dark and the lights were off. It was late, but he was still surprised that no one was on the floor. Larson usually had people in his office at this time of day. Not even the stern security who guarded Larson's door was at a post. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of his footfalls as he walked. The lack of life in Councilman Larson's office was unsettling. Quickening his pace, he barged into Larson's office. The door swung open, and he entered the room, richly appointed, spacious, and grand. Larson obviously had a taste for impressive digs. Maybe it stemmed from the fact that he was such a short man. The windows opening over the city gave an impression of a lord looking over his domain. The carved ebony desk seemed to suck in light. The fact that the councilman was gagged and hog-tied on his desk underlined that Star Coyote had just walked into something unexpected. Okay? Star Coyote mumbled as he arched an eyebrow, his ears flicking. This was unexpected. When the door slammed closed behind him, he knew he was not alone. "Well, look at what we have here, sister," said a vixen in a very revealing leather outfit. A cap perched between her ears, black mask on her face. She had deep russet fur with bright white highlights. Her whiskers were trimmed, and she had a smooth, jaunty waggle of her hips as a fluffy tail trailed behind her easily. Star Coyote also noticed a bullwhip and a utility belt perched on her hips. "A dashing hero come to save the day?" asked another voice, with a rhetorical flourish. Star Coyote glanced at the other side of the room as another vixen in a similar outfit revealed herself from behind Larson's desk. Her fur was a lighter tone, and she had a similar gait. The two weren't twins, despite how similar they looked. Even from here, Star Coyote could smell that. The second vixen added, "What a unique surprise. But whatever is he doing here? In the offices of such an esteemed businessman and politician," mused the first vixen aloud. As they moved closer to the coyote, their bodies moved in a mirror of each other as they slowly circled Star Coyote. They were trying to box in him. Star may not have been on the job long, but he had learned group tactics well enough to spot that. The masks on their faces suggested they were either super beings with a lean towards criminal activities, or they were posers. It was always hard to tell. Nowadays, some people did wear masks as a fashion statement. There was an entire underground anti-authority culture that enjoyed using supervillain gear and styles, not to mention the more, kinky aspect. He looked between the two of them and waiting for their next move. "Agree, sister. What could Twinkle Doggy be thinking?" asked the second one as he slid back to the desk and sat down near the councilman. The ferret wriggled on the desk as a paw patted his ears. The name-calling was a rather transparent gambit, an attempt to maneuver themselves into a better position. The implied threat to the councilman was an obvious play for his intention as well. Larson had sifted him from the sense of their little game to being a helpless bystander. Well, I think Mr. Shiny Pup might be here to stop us, said the first vixen with a wide grin. Isn't that adorable, sister? He thinks he can play with the big girls. Well, I'd like to know who you are, Star Coyote cut in. Their coy smiles were just as off-putting as their attitude. They acted like they had this entire situation perfectly in paw. It was as if they had expected him from the beginning, and this was their endgame for the evening. Star Coyote retorted, asking the obvious question. I mean, am I fighting the leather lasses or something? Both vixens chuckled. The first one, who was getting very close and fondling the handle to her whip, spoke up. Oh, how droll. He's trying to be amusing. Well, Shiny Pup, I happen to be Cinnamon, and I'm Spice. The one near Councilman Larson said with a girlish giggle. Isn't Cinnamon just a type of Spice? Star Coyote asked, putting his paws on his hips, looking at the two of them. The use of code names, another check in the column, marking them super criminals. Both vixens laughed at that. It was sincere. Unlike the other times, which had a tint of condescending amusement, this time they seemed to find the comment genuinely funny. They glanced at each other, and with a smile, Cinnamon commented, Well, I suppose that is true. However, I don't think a grown coyote in tight blue spandex has much room to criticize our names. It's better than Sugar and Spice, said Spice with a charmed smile at Star. After all, we weren't made with sugar. We vixens have a little more flair. Star smirked at the two of them. They were trying to figure him out, just like he was. They had to be. Their banter was an attempt to ferret out information on the opposing side. Turnabout was only fair play. May I ask what you think you two are doing with the councilman? You don't know? Asked Spice with a mock disappointment. I thought he called you in for help when we tied him up. You know, with one of those Deus Ex Machina superhero devices so many government people carry around. Well, no. Star looked at the two of them, flicking his ears as he laid some of his cards on the table. I didn't know you were here. I was coming to arrest him for graft. Larson's eyes widened and he growled, wriggling on his desk. Papers falling to the floor as he strained in his bounds. Spice painfully booped his muzzle and he stopped struggling, looking up her as he whimpered. The vixen on the desk looked at Star Coyote with a smile. Why, that's why we're here as well. Star Coyote arched his brow and flicked his ears. This was making less and less sense. You ever heard of superheroes wearing skimpy leather costumes and tying a guy up like that? He looked at Cinnamon, who's sauntering close. Oh? Well, my sister exaggerates, said Cinnamon with a coy twist of her lips. You see, we know all about his illegal deals. The drug money? Spice said with a girlish giggle. Cinnamon grinned, flicking her tail and added, the gangs he controls in the city. The illegal gambling parlours and money laundering, said Spice, waving her tail in the bound ferret's face. The tail teasing his nose made him sneeze helplessly. The illegal arms shipments to Quebecois rebels in Canada and other fringe groups across the North American continent, said Cinnamon with an ear twitch. And of course, the prostitution rings and escort services, said Spice with a smug delight. This dear boy controls most of the illegal sex business in the city. If not the state, said Cinnamon, and Star detected a hint of hardness in that comment. Cinnamon seemed like the older one. Her paw gripped the handle of her whip tightly now. Among his other illegal acts, you know, he loves to sample his goods. Well, the women at least. Plays very rough with them too, said Spice offhandedly. Well, when this one ordered a foxy for the night, how could we resist the opportunity? He thought he was getting a 2-for-1 deal, said Cinnamon with a flinty smile as he looked past Star Coyote at the ferret. Getting him tied up, after all, that was far too easy. Indeed, I was almost looking for a challenge, said Spice. She glanced down at the politician. Almost. Perhaps we have one here, Spice, said Cinnamon with a grin, looking at Star Coyote. Tell me, Starsy, will you help my sister and I have a good time, Star Coyote looked between the two of them, his tail raised confidently as he decided his next move. Obviously, these two enjoyed talking. Buying time made sense as he tried to figure out if they had any weird powers he should be concerned about. He floated off the floor almost imperceptibly. His super flying speed didn't work when he was firmly on the ground. He might need the extra urge. He looked at the two of them. So we're not at the cross purpose then. The police have been looking to get him for a while. So has the district attorney. Why don't we work together and take him in? The two vixens laughed at that. It was a cold, angry laugh. The 10 of their body language changed completely. Spice was the first to say her piece. Don't be silly, Coyote. Why do you think the police will hold him? He's brought off so many of them. The system is dirty, Twinkle Doggy, said Cinnamon, barely containing the bitterness in her voice. Honestly, you're far too trusting if you think they'll be able to keep him locked up for long. Star flexed his fingers, getting ready for a fight. He knew it had to come. These two were obviously not going to make this easy. The Coyote just knew he was going to be late for his date with Jay. They didn't trust the system. They didn't want to work within the rules. He'd have to fight them. He'd hoped he could win, but he didn't know with these two. So what are you planning? Cinnamon held up a data storage device for a computer with the utter confidence of someone who had just revealed their ace in the hole. This, my dear, and just what is on that? Asked Star Coyote as he watched the two, hoping they'd offer something he could use to his tactical advantage. Spice slid off the desk and sauntered forward towards them. Well, it's a copy of Larson's records. The complete books, his secret business dealings, underground accountants, contact information, numbers to accounts in assorted banks and dummy corporations, Swiss accounts, names, dates, even a record of his assorted jewels from a brief stint in the black market gem store business. The good councilman keeps immaculate records in a safe place. And now we have them, said Cinnamon with a wide grin. Just imagine the fun we'll have in Sao Paulo or Macau. So that's it, asked Star, looking between them with some irritation now. You're robbing him, taking his money after trying to him up. With that information you could beat him down hard, get the law on him, expose him to the public. Instead you'll just go spend it in some far-off city and leave him to continue with his crimes. Well, listen to him, said Cinnamon with a smirk and a snap of fingers, getting all self-righteous about what we're doing. Such a silly idealist, said Spice. Do you really think anyone could hold the councilman or stop him from achieving his goals? Be realistic, Coyote. We're just stealing from a rich criminal who would never be held accountable. His funds would just disappear and reappear somewhere else. Who would that benefit? Exactly, said Cinnamon with a smirk. We're just going to take a nice chunk of change from this fellow, have a little fun with it. And he can't go to the cops about it because, Spice grinned and twitched her tail, he'd have to say where he got all that money from and admit two little fox girls overpowered him. You do realise I have to stop you, said Star Coyote, simply looking between them and sternly as he floated above the plush carpeted floor. The councilman is rotten, but I can't let you take evidence or steal from him. 2 wrongs don't make a right. And make sure to brush your teeth and be in by 10, right, doggy? Said Cinnamon as her whip unfurled. Star heard Spices do the same thing and they slid towards him, circling him in earnest now. We do outnumber you, Spice said, and the rigger was really helpful in creating some fun inventions for us. Rigger? The Coyote grimaced. One of the old super criminals on record. He'd taken on all the world's most powerful villains and was even victorious at times. He made weird inventions, like flash bombs made out of tuna cans and Christmas star lights. Star had taken him on once before, and it wasn't fun, especially when he hit him with a frisbee containing a spring-loaded device that had wrapped his arms in steel cables. The Otter was known for training other super criminals if he liked them. If he'd given these 2 pointers, this fight would really not work out well. Oh yes, said Cinnamon. With that, the battle had begun, and the whip cracked out toward the Coyote. Star dodged. The whip tipped just barely. Unfortunately, he had underestimated Spice, who had leaped into the air. With an acrobatic twirl through the air, her own whip cracked outwards. The tough lever wrapped around Star's paw as she landed and spun around, pulling the now very lightweight Coyote. Cinnamon was running towards him as he slammed into the ground. The whip unfurled from his paws. Star Coyote braced himself as best he could from the prone position on the ground. Cinnamon leapt into the air with a frightening grace and speed. She pirouetted and slammed her boots against the glass of the large window looking out of the city. Surprisingly, the glass held as she rocketed away while throwing little knives at Star Coyote. Star Coyote winced as the knives sliced through the air. They didn't touch him beyond a few scratches. The knives were thrown with care not to hurt him. They had, however, pinned his left arm and right leg to the ground through his costume. The sheer precision required to do that was incredible. He closed his eyes and made himself heavier, pulled his arm up, ripping the knives out and tearing his costume. He sighed inwardly. He was going to take dares to repair those rips on his sewing machine. He kept that to himself. Instead, he said, "Cute moves." Cinnamon and Spice looked at each other, grinning. Obviously, they were charmed. Spice said, someone wants a challenge then?" Before they could continue, Star Coyote was up in the air and flying directly at them. They hadn't expected him to move so quickly, and they were close enough together for his charge to hit them both. He grabbed Cinnamon with his arm and pushed Spice down to the ground. Twirling up into the vaulted ceiling of the office, he gripped Cinnamon and spun around. He planned to make her dizzy, but she squirmed out of his grip. She was slippery and far too nimble to be normal. Out of his hold, she kicked him in the chest. He growled from the pain. She fell toward the ground head first, but she twisted with impeccable grace and landed daintily. Spice even gave her an amused clap as Cinnamon did a little bow. Star swung around in the air and floated above them. He had quickly interposed himself between the two of them, moving at a speed beyond most people's comprehensive. The sudden change in air pressure caused by his rapid swoop was powerful enough to rattle the windows as he lashed out at both of the vixens. Normally that little move worked on gangbangers and thugs. The street toughs would be surprised and wheeled back from him. The vixens easily dodged his blows as they spun around, their ribs cracking. They were trying the same feint again, but this time Star Coyote was ready. He grabbed both whips, wincing as he felt them cut through his gloves, giving him a rope burn on the pads of his paws. Ignoring the pain, he channeled his weightlessness down the whips. He practiced this before. As long as he held the whips, he could affect them. He smirked as he found themselves lifted into the air, becoming weightless. They struggled awkwardly, having lost their purchase on solid ground. With that loss, their usual agility was nearly neutralized. They couldn't have practiced in a low-gravity environment. Their surprise at the situation only caused them to grip the whips tighter. Star Coyote grinned confidently. Now who's out of their league? He pulled out their whips, sending them careening around the room, unable to control their motion. The two vixens were not phased as they were flung around the room. Instead of letting go, they skillfully rebounded from the walls and pushed towards the coyote. That was a surprise. Star Coyote let go of the whips and ducked to the ground as they flew at him. Their return to gravity wasn't sudden. It never was. They seemed to adjust as they fell down. They landed near a window while Star found himself back by the door. The councilman was still watching from his desk, scared out of his wits and unable to escape from his bindings. Spice went into a runner's starting crouch, her body composed like an elegant fairy spring. She jumped at Star. The coyote swung out of the way of her fist as she leaped at him. He barely saw Cinnamon coming from behind in a coordinated attack. The two were a team, and the coyote could see they'd trained hard together. He was expecting their moves this time as he breezily dodged their blows. They weren't holding back. They focused on removing him as a threat. Their earlier delicate moves and flourishes were replaced with elegant simplicity. He swung around and a fist connected with Spice's side. As he spun away, moving with the momentum of the blow, he felt a kick jostle him from Cinnamon. It kicked him forward, but he was ready for it. He swung his leg back in a move he learned at the YMCA judo class. The hook of his left leg caught her, but she flipped into the air before he could trip her to the ground. The two went into defensive postures and circled him as Star Coyote floated into the air. The time for showing off abilities was at an end. Sheer brute force was needed. Sadly, when he floated, he had less momentum. His punches and grabs wouldn't be as effective. He still had an edge, however. They hadn't expected him to be competent. The fact that they underestimated him played to his advantage. Cinnamon lashed out with a throwing star. It wasn't meant to kill, simply wound. Star Coyote dodged it. He was too quick while floating in the air. He spun around and neatly twisted out of a flying punch Spice tried to land. She was a prodigious jumper. Star had to admit that the two had a lot of skill. The lighter-coloured, bubbly vixen said nothing as she flew past him. She flipped in the air and landed beside her sister by the window. They glared at him for a moment, and then both muzzles broke into wide grins. "Well, someone has talent," said Cinnamon with a flaunted swish of her tail. "We seem to have underestimated him, didn't we, Spice?" "Oh yes," said Spice with a smile. "He might actually be a challenge." "And I have to give him credit for not copping too much of a feel when he grabbed me," said Cinnamon. "So, why not just come quietly? The police won't throw the book at you," said Smile with an easy smile. Cinnamon motioned at the ferret. "Like that one wouldn't try." "Sorry, Coyote Boy, but we don't plan to stay in any old cell. We're getting the chips and cotton seats and fine caviar tonight," said Spice. "On that note, perhaps it is time for us to leave," said Cinnamon. "Couldn't agree with you more, sister," said Spice. And with that, the friction threw what looked like a labelless soup can at the window. It had suspicious yellow and purple lights at the top of the which blinked as it approached the window. A powerful blast was sounded in the room, making Star's ears wince. The glass shattered and seemed to dematerialize. Run of Riggers, classic disintegration bombs that confirmed their training. They had added some water smoke bomb, obscuring them from view. Star coughed as he looked around. The smoke was quickly swept away by the wind as the pressure in the room changed. They hadn't anticipated that, and they clearly expected to escape using the smoke for cover. The two vixens stood at the edge of the high-rise buildings, backs to the city, facing the Coyote. "Ciao," said Cinnamon with a salute. In perfect synchronization, the two fell backwards out of the open window. Star Coyote grasped and flew out after them as quickly as he could, but as he soared out into the window, he watched the two twirl and use their whips to grab purchase from the city's buildings as they spun away in opposite directions. He would need to choose one to follow, and he got the distinct feeling he wouldn't be able to catch up with either of them easily. They probably had some way to remove their costumes quickly and blend into the city. Foxes were common in Portland. These two wouldn't stick out. He grimaced as he floated, watching them escape. He heard sirens below as police cars pulled up, and he saw news vans as well. Looking back in the office, he saw Larson still tied up on the desk. He had to take Larson in. Sighing, he flew back into the office and walked over to the desk. Whoever wrote the top 10 songs about superheroes and not having responsibilities needed a serious talking to. "Are you okay, sir?" he asked as he undid the gag and started to work on the bindings that hog-tied the councilman. "No thanks to you," the ferret growled as he was freed. "Why the hell didn't you go after those sluts?" "Well, I was convinced with your safety, sir," Star Coyote said easily. He helped the ferret stand up off his desk, but his hands were still bound behind him. Star Coyote grabbed them with a paw and continued. "Besides, you're high priority. You're under arrest by the authority given to me by the City of Portland's citizen arrest laws." He lifted into the air and out the window. The ferret gasped and began to squirm as Star Coyote easily flew out the window. "I wouldn't move around so much," Star said calmly. "I might lose my grip, and if I let go, who knows if I can catch you." The ferret looked up at him. His eyes bulged, but he stopped moving around. The Coyote knew he'd be able to catch him even if he did fall, but why not put a little fear into him? It was a small consolation after his vixens got away. Stratagem of Force Vixen never got duped by women in low-cut leather halter tops. The hero floated easily to the ground. Councilman Philip Larson clutched tightly in one paw. Cameras flashed as he landed on the ground. Police lights flashing as Star looked around. The ferret wrestled out of his paws and tried to resurrect some measure of dignity, but his paws were still tied behind him. He hobbled forwards towards some paramedics while saying, "I'm going to sue that spandex off of you, you self-righteous vigilante." The angry councilman found an ambulance easily as Star shook his head. He was somewhat shielded from legal attribution, a law that Larson himself had helped the city council to pass last year. A grey and tan Coyote woman approached behind him. Melinda Ramirez's uniform wasn't not perfect. It had a crease there, a wrinkle here, caused by her careless late nights. Star grinned at her as he sidled up beside him. Assistant District Attorney John Swain joined them quickly, ducking the TV lights and flashing cameras as Larson raised a loud din. "What's his problem?" asked Belinda as she looked at him. "Well, being hogtied by super criminal vixens will make anyone irritable," said Star Coyote simply. Ada Swain gave Star Coyote an odd look at that. but Pine Martin, in contrast to Belinda, was impeccably dressed. Star was never saw how the Martin always appeared to be so put together and completely unflappable. He sighed after a few moments and asked the Star the obvious question. Super criminal vixens? Yeah. Star Coyote rolled his eyes, blushing slightly, as he held out his left arm, showing the torn costume. We might have a new threat in town. They call themselves Cinnamon Spice. Need to have that checked? Asked Belinda, inclining her head towards the paramedics. I'm pretty sure they'd be glad to take an injured hero before any loudmouths. Star shook his head, chuckling. I'm not getting involved with that. He's under my citizen's arrest like we needed, but if I were you, I'd read him his rights when he's done pontificating. Have the warrants ready to be signed, said Swain with a confident smile. I am concerned about these super criminals, though. I don't like the idea of them setting up in our city. I guess they were the pair of foxes in the gauche and skimpy leather who swung over our heads earlier? Asked Belinda with an ear twitch. Yup, Star Coyote said with a chuckle before he could stop himself. He decided to add, someone needs to tell them that low-cut leather push-up bras went out with the 80s. Belinda laughed, but Swain just gave him a odd look. He shook his head. I noticed they escaped. Sorry, Star Coyote said, a little more chagrined. I had to decide between them or Larson. He might have destroyed evidence and escaped before I got back from chasing them down. Those two might have contaminated evidence, said Swain with a note of worry. At the very least, his defense lawyers will claim that. Yeah, that might be a problem. Star Coyote nodded his head, especially since they targeted him specifically for his criminal dealings. Well, you do have to respect that, said Belinda with a slight smile. We've been after him for years, and they get to tie him up. Assuming they haven't been after him a while themselves, said Star Coyote with a nod. It might be, but Larson would tell the defense lawyers that any super criminals planted this evidence on him. I'm sure they can spin some conspiracy theory about discrediting the councilman or something else, said Swain irritably now. And if Star Coyote takes the bench, he'll corroborate it. Damn, they can make a good case of evidence contamination. Why didn't you catch them? At least then I could have looked them away and used that to pacify the jury. Nothing deflates a super criminal contamination argument harder than having the super locked up. Are you sure you're working with us? Take it easy, John, said Belinda, coming to the fellow Coyote's defense. This was pretty harebrained as it was. We'll work with what we have. I've got the crime scene boys here. They're good guys. Clean as a whistle. We've got the cards we were dealt, so let's play them. Who could predict the super criminal duo showing up? Super criminal and superhero conspirators get eaten up by the jury, especially if you don't have the criminals behind bars. People love to assume they did all the law breaking, said Ada Swan, his whiskers twitching irritation. Superheroes might be popular, but pundits and irresponsible politicians have played their crazy persecution theories. Lots of people haven't internalized that. Well, you're good, Swain. You'll figure something out, said Belinda. They may have gotten away, but they can still help with the case, said Star with a wide grin as he turned to make sure Larson couldn't see him as he raised up a data storage device. I got this of cinnamon. I assume that was one of the vixens, said Swain looking at it. What is on it? Not much, said Star with a wide panting grin. Just every last one of Larson's illegal dealings in digital format, or so the vixens claimed at least. A Star dropped it into Belinda's paws. He grinned very widely with a sly coyote chuckle passing her black lips. Oh my, that is perfect. I grabbed it while tussling with them. I don't even think they realized what I was doing in the fight, grabbing them like that. They probably thought I was just copping a feel, said Star with a smile. It should help a lot. The courts will find it inadmissible, said Ada Swain with a shake of his head. Which is the same. I bet it has some damning evidence on it. I'm positive it does, said Star Coyote. They won't take it. Superhero evidence gathering is tricky at best. With what Larson's attorneys will bring to bear, I doubt it will come to stand up in court. Well, who says I grabbed it while arresting him? Asked Star Coyote. I just happened to grab it off a pair of super criminals while they were committing a crime. Rather high-profile super criminals, I might add, who the press will publish salacious photos of. Belinda's smile widened as he said that. So we'll have to check every record on here to find a connection to them so we can prosecute. Swain's face broke out into a very toothy smile. And with these files open to us, we'll be able to uncover and subpoena all of Larson's hidden dealings. They can be declared evidence found in the investigation of another crime. Star Coyote gave a happy wag of his tail. Yep. We might not be able to use the files directly, but they're a smoking gun to everything else Larson has done. Definitely, said Swain with a chuckle. I'm gonna make sure the paperwork has all the dots and crosses in the right spots. Belinda, get that to the evidence personally. Star Coyote, do you want to say a few words to the press with me? Star Coyote glanced at a bank clock that was flashing the time winds. I can't. I'm sort of late for something. Ada Swan shrugged. Well, alright then. I'll make sure you mention you. But I think you're missing out on a golden press opportunity here. What could be more important than sealing the deal with this case? Talk to my agent, said Star leaping into the air and zooming away. He was sure he heard Belinda ask the assistant district attorney, honestly, where does he zoom off to all the time? Does he have a hot date or something? Star Coyote smiled as he flew home. The slight aches and pains of battle were forgotten after the successful mission. He landed on a roof near his apartment and quickly changed into his civilian clothes. Putting his costume into a duffel bag, he glanced around and floated down into an alleyway. Landing on the ground, he quickly walked out and joined the crowd of fellow Portlanders. He grinned to himself, happily ignoring the twinge from his paw as he almost skipped home. He didn't want to run for fear of drawing unnecessary attention. After all, why would Ted Rodriguez be running down the street? He was just an everyday citizen. Getting home, Ted took off his ratty civilian clothes and tossed on a denim jacket, some jeans and some nice-looking casual shirt. He quickly brushed his fur, make sure he was looking somewhat presentable. Ted smiled and wagged with glee. He looked nice. It took a moment to clean out the wounds on his hands and bandage them. He wasn't sure how he could explain that to anyone right now. It took a moment to clean out the wounds on his hand and bandage them. He wasn't sure how he could explain that to anyone right now. Ted glanced at his clock. He was already late, and he couldn't fly like this, so he just ran out the door and down the stairs. It was quicker than the elevator thanks to a judicious use of his power. Ted was out the door and jogging down the street in moments. It took him a good 15 minutes, but part of him was stopping off at a florist for some lavender and baby's breath. He was soon at the door of Joe's apartment complex and ringing the bell to apartment 352B. The buzzer rang and he was up the stairs as quick as he could go. All the superhero work had put him in great shape, so he was barely panting when he reached the door and knocked. The door opened up and a collie, his own black and white fur brushed to a nice luster, smiled at him. He was wearing a simple, light blue button shop shirt and clean, unwrinkled chinos. Everything about him spoke of an unaffected professional. His body firm, but still fluffy. His brown eyes brightened up as he looked up at the coyote. He grinned, stepping aside so Ted could enter the apartment and wagged his happy tail, saying, "Glad to see you made it. I 20 minutes late this time." Ted chuckled, and his tail went down slightly in contrition as he said that. "Sorry about that. Maybe some flowers will help?" Jay smiled, taking them and fetching something to put them in as he said, "So what happened? Not traffic this time, I hope." Ted blushed, trying to think of a realistic excuse. Really, it was a wonder Jay put up with his tardiness. The coyote had been trying to manage his time better. Well, just general stuff. I lost track of time. "I need to buy you a better clock," Jay said, putting the flowers on the table and a pewter pitcher. The collie slid closer to the coyote and smiled. "But first, something I wanted to give you." The kiss was short but tender. Their lips brushed together and Ted found his arms creeping around the collie, holding him gingerly as he kissed. Finally, their kiss broke. Jay looked down at Ted's paws and saw the bandages. "What happened?" Just a little mishap," said Ted with a slight roll of his eyes as he licked his nose, slightly hoping the dog wouldn't press the issue. "What sort of mishap?" asked Jay, his eyes narrowing slightly, looking at the bandages. Ted squirmed under his gaze, searching for an excuse. He said, "Kitchen accident? I was trying to cook something." Jay chuckled and shook his head. He seemed to believe that. "You really shouldn't let me do the cooking. You have more accidents in your kitchen than everyone else I know put together. What was it a few weeks ago, picking up a hot pan with an oven mitt?" It had actually been a hot piece of roof he moved during a fire in an office park as he tried to save someone, but the pan worked for a cover story. He wasn't really sure if he should tell Jay he was a superhero. How could he deal with that kind of information? Jay might not react well to dating a super-powered freak who dressed up in a costume to fight crime. Better for now to keep it under his mask and keep the excuses to the mundane. Ted nodded and said, "Sorry, I guess you're just stuck with an accident-prone coyote." "Good. Though I do like your cooking, I don't want you to die by pie," the collie said with a broad smile, and then Jay added, "Try and be better about being on time. Brandon, Maddie and Gary already left for the docks." "The docks?" asked Ted quizzically, turning his head. "Well, you have been talking so much about gambling lately, I thought a night at the casino might be fun," said Jay with a grin. "It's funny, I never thought of you as a gambler type." Ted blushed. He'd been talking about it a lot. He had researched it for Larson's arrest today, but he never could resist talking about his latest reading material to everyone around him. "Well, I haven't done it that often. I was just interested." Jay ragged at him and gave him a smile. "I was hoping you'd say that. I was thinking you would enjoy a boat cruise around the river instead. You know, taking the city lights. I know a dinner boat that leaves pretty soon." "Sounds fun to me," said Ted, a happy grin on his muzzle as he pressed against the warm body of the collie. He wasn't sure if they were boyfriends yet, but they had been getting closer. He enjoyed as they looked into the collie's eyes. Jay's phone rang just before he could give him another kiss. Jay broke the embrace and picked up his cell phone. For a few moments he was talking to someone on the other end. After a bit of garbled agitation from the receiver, he closed the cell phone and looked at Ted. "Well, good thing I made the reservation on the dinner boat. Apparently that gambling ship just got impounded as evidence by the police. Gary said something about illegal money and profiteering or something. Apparently it'll be on the news tonight, and we should watch him from in the crowd." The coyote guessed Belinda worked fast. He looked at Jay with some slight worry. "Everyone okay?" "Yeah," Jay grinned. "Thanks to your slow softball, they weren't on the boat, so they're all fine and going over to that new cafe place I told you about." Ted fought back for a moment, trying to remember the name of the place. Drawing a blank, he said, "What was that name again?" "Somewhere over the Java," said Jay with a wag of his tail pleasantly as he added, "It's a nice spot. I think you should see about taking me there." "If I play my cards right, do I get a reward?" asked Ted with a sly grin as he and Jay got ready to leave, the thought of that kiss lingering on both their minds as they looked at each other. "Only if you don't overplay your hand," said Jay with a smile as they stepped out of the apartment. The two took the stairs down and out onto the street. "Good thing I know when to hold them and when to fold them," said the coyote, wrapping an arm around Jay and drawing him close. Jay didn't resist the touch, instead seemed to smile, leaning against him. "I think I'd better stop with these puns. They're distracting me from a more important game," said Jay with a happy smile as the sun began to sink and the twilight graced the city. The collie's arm reached around the small of Ted's back as they walked. TVs and newspapers were already emblazoned with the picture of Star Coyotes arresting Larson and Ada Swan. Neither canine really noticed that they was busy with more personal things and happily talking about their plans for the night. Know When to Fold 'Em by D.J.Fahl was first published in Raw Volume 2, edited by Buxy Turner, published by Bad Dog Books 2010, and now currently published by FurPlanet.